So, there is a jar in my kitchen right now that is older than my grandchildren. It sits on a shelf in the cool part of the house, and inside it is food, real food, that my mother put up with her own hands, and it is not only still good, it is better now than the day she made it. Not old the way last week's rice is old, not spoiled, not stale, not something you hold your nose and throw away. Old the way a stone by a river is old, and it is not the only thing on that shelf that will outlive me. Some of the food in my house was never going to spoil at all, and I want to show you what it is, because I have been quietly keeping a store of these things for 40 years, and I think in the world we live in now, you should too. You do not have to take an old man's word for it. Some years ago, archaeologists opened a tomb in Egypt that had been sealed for more than 3,000 years, and among the treasures they found jars of honey, not fossilized, not turned to dust. Honey, still golden, still sweet, still perfectly good to eat, after 3,000 years in the dark. That is not a trick and it is not a legend. It is simply what honey does, and honey is only the beginning. My name is Kenji Tanaka. I am 68 years old, and my wife Yuki and I have kept a home for 38 years the way my grandmother taught me to keep one, which means we have never once had a kitchen that was truly empty. Now, I have to be honest with you before I go one step further, because the title of this video uses the words never expire, and that is not quite an honest thing to say, and a man who oversells you the first food will make you doubt the last one. So let me be precise. The foods I am going to show you fall into three kinds. Some of them last for decades if you keep them properly. Some of them, as far as anyone has ever been able to tell, last essentially forever. And a few of them, the ones from my mother's kitchen that I love the most, actually improve with age, so that the older they grow, the more precious they become. I am going to show you all three, and I am going to save the immortal ones, the ones I trust with my life, for the very end. So stay with me. Because here is the thing I want you to understand first. These foods did not disappear from our homes because they stopped working. They disappeared because the refrigerator arrived. Almost overnight, a machine in the corner of the kitchen made it feel as though every food was fragile, as though everything had a clock ticking on it, and within a single generation we forgot the older truth, that for most of human history, people had no refrigerator at all and did not starve when the power went out, because they kept the right things. Nobody hid this from you. Nobody buried it. We simply set it down and walked away from it, because the machine was easier, and a thing that is easy to forget gets forgotten. But a thing that is only forgotten can be remembered again. Let me remember it with you. Start with the humblest tier, the foods that last not forever but for decades, because these are the backbone of any real store, and every culture on earth discovered them independently, which should tell you something. The Roman legions marched across a continent on a hard, dry biscuit that kept for years in a soldier's pack. The Mongol horsemen crossed the whole of Asia on dried curd and dried meat that never saw a cold cellar. The sailors who first crossed the great oceans, months and months without the sight of a single green field, lived out of barrels of dried and salted provisions and came home alive. And the Japanese farmer, living on a narrow island of earthquakes and typhoons and long hungry winters, kept rice, white rice, hulled and dried, because sealed away from air and moisture it holds for decades. Not months, decades. Scientists have taken white rice stored for 30 years and found it still good to eat. Every one of these people, in every corner of the world, separated by oceans and centuries and languages, arrived at the very same handful of answers. And that is because hunger is a strict teacher, and it teaches everyone the same lesson. Beside the rice, my grandmother kept dried beans and dried barley, the same as a Roman or a Mongol or an ocean sailor would have, foods stripped of their water so that time simply has nothing left to work with. A sack of rice kept properly is not really groceries at all. It is an insurance policy that you can eat. And then there were the foods that are the quiet genius of a Japanese kitchen, the dried things that make everything else taste like more. A sheet of dried kelp, we call it kombu, kept in a dry cupboard, holds its flavor for years, and the white dust that forms on it is not mold, it is the taste itself rising to the surface. Dried mushrooms, shiitake, dried until they are hard as wood, last for years and grow deeper and stronger in flavor as they sit. And there is a block of dried fish, katsuobushi we call it, smoked and dried and aged until it is one of the hardest foods on earth, so hard you shave it with a blade like wood, and it keeps almost indefinitely. A handful of these dried things and a little water, and a person who has nothing else can still make a broth that tastes like care. But stay with me, because everything I have named so far only lasts. It survives time. The foods I am building toward do something stranger and more wonderful than survive, and I am keeping them for the end. Before I show you them, though, I have to tell you why any of this works, because once you understand the one idea underneath it, you will never look at your own pantry the same way again, and you will be able to judge for yourself what will keep and what will not. Here is the whole secret, and it is almost insultingly simple. The things that make food rot, the molds and the bacteria, are alive, and like everything alive, they need water to live. Take the water away, or lock it up so tightly they cannot reach it, and they simply cannot survive, and the food cannot rot. That is all preservation has ever been. Drying removes the water outright, which is why the rice and the beans and the dried fish keep. Salt and sugar do something cleverer. They pull the water out of anything they touch and hold it, which is why a food packed in enough salt or enough sugar becomes a desert that nothing can live in. Honey does this so perfectly that it needs no help at all. It holds almost no free water, and it is naturally acidic besides, and that is why a jar of it can sit in a tomb for 3,000 years and come out sweet. And then there is the cleverest trick of all, which my ancestors built an entire cuisine upon, and it is called fermentation. Fermentation is not spoilage. It is the opposite of spoilage. It is decay placed under a firm human hand, where we invite in the one friendly microbe we want and let it fill the food with salt and acid until nothing dangerous can ever move in afterward. A fermented food is not waiting to go bad. The going bad already happened, on purpose, under control, and what is left is stable for years. Now, if you have stayed with me this far, you already understand more about keeping a home fed than most modern kitchens will ever hold. But before I show you the immortal foods, the ones I promised you, I have to tell you the one mistake that undoes all of it, because I would rather you do this right than do it eagerly. It is water and air. Every food I have named keeps only if you keep the water and the air away from it. Rice left open to a humid kitchen will not last 30 years. It will spoil in one wet season, and there is one trap in particular I have to warn you about. When I tell people to store rice, they sometimes reach for brown rice, thinking it is the healthier choice, and for eating today it may well be. But brown rice still has its natural oils in it, and oils go rancid, and so brown rice will turn in a matter of months. It is white rice, with the oily bran polished away, that keeps for decades. The difference between a store that saves you and a store that rots quietly in the dark is nothing more than keeping the air and the water out, and knowing which foods still carry their oils. And while we are speaking of mistakes, Let me say a word about the little date printed on the package, because I believe it has filled more rubbish bins than almost anything else ever invented. On most of the foods I am showing you, that date does not mean what you have been led to believe. It is not the day the food turns dangerous. It is, at the very most, the day the maker stops promising you it is at its absolute peak, and that is an entirely different thing. Salt cannot read the date. Honey does not care. Rice sealed away from the air is not counting the days on a calendar. We have been quietly trained to obey that little number over the plain evidence of our own eyes and our own nose, to carry good food to the bin because the ink told us to, and my grandmother, who threw away nothing in her life, would have found that a kind of madness. On these foods, you are allowed to trust yourself again. Look at it, smell it. Your own senses are far older and far wiser than a stamp from a machine. I want to pause on something here because I do not want you to hear fear in my voice, and a great many videos about stockpiling food are really selling you fear. I am not. I do not believe some catastrophe is coming next week, and I am not asking you to dig a bunker. The grocery store is not lying to you, and fresh food is one of the quiet miracles of a modern life. But the grocery store and the machine in the corner taught us to believe that food is fragile, that it must be bought in small amounts and used within days and replaced again and again forever, when for almost all of human history that was simply not true. We did not lose these foods to a villain. We lost them to convenience. And the cost of that forgetting is not only money, though it is a great deal of money over a life. It is that a home which keeps nothing is a home that is always 3 days from empty, always dependent on the truck arriving and the shelf being full and the power staying on. My grandmother lived through years when none of those things could be counted on, and she was never once afraid of an empty week because her shelf was never empty. I remember one winter when I was small, when the snow came down for the better part of 2 weeks and closed the roads, and the little shops in our town stood picked clean, their shelves bare, and I could feel the worry in the grown-ups around me. And in our house, nothing changed. My grandmother went to her shelf, to the rice and the dried fish and the miso and the salt and the pickles, and she cooked, exactly as she did any other week, and we ate warm food every single night. And I was small enough that I did not even understand anything unusual was happening. That is what a store does. It quietly turns what is a crisis for everyone else into an ordinary Tuesday for you. She was not a survivalist, and there was no fear in her. She was simply a woman who kept a proper pantry, the way her own mother had kept one before her. To keep a store is not to fear tomorrow. It is to be quietly ready for it, the way people were ready for 10,000 years before we forgot how. So here they are, the foods I trust with my life, the ones that do not merely last, but never truly die. Salt, first, because salt is the oldest one of all, and it does not spoil, it cannot spoil, and it is the very thing that makes half of this list possible. Whole cities grew rich on the salt trade, roads were built for it, and the Roman soldier was once paid a portion of his wages in salt, which is where your word salary comes from to this very day. It does not rot for the simplest reason there is nothing in it for rot to feed on. Sugar sits beside it and keeps for the same reason. A jar of honey, which, as I have already told you, outlasts empires and comes out of a sealed tomb, sweet after 3,000 years. And good vinegar, which is itself an acid so hostile to rot that we use it to preserve other things. These you can keep, sealed and dry and cool, and hand to your grandchildren, and they will be exactly as good in their hands as in yours. And then, the 3 I have been saving, the ones from my mother's kitchen that do the thing almost no other food on earth can do. They get better. Soy sauce, properly made and kept, deepens and rounds as it ages. Miso, the fermented soybean paste that is the soul of our cooking, does not go bad. It darkens and grows stronger and more complex, so that an old miso is not a spoiled miso, it is a richer one, a different and deeper food than it was when it was young, and last of all, the one I promised you at the very beginning, the jar older than my grandchildren, umeboshi, plums packed in salt until they become something between a food and a medicine, so preserved by that salt that they last not years but decades, generations, and in the oldest families of Japan, there are jars of umeboshi over 100 years old, still eaten, still whole, and considered more precious the older they are. The one in my kitchen my mother made, and it is older than my own son, and I promise you it is better today than the day she sealed it. I remember watching her make them when I was a boy. In the early summer when the plums came in, her hands stained and stinging from the salt, packing them down into the crock with the deep red shiso leaves, and I remember thinking it was a great deal of trouble for a sour little plum. I understand it now. A single one of those plums, no bigger than the tip of your thumb, will wake up an entire bowl of plain white rice. The jar she filled the year my son was born has gone with us through winter colds and long journeys and hard gray mornings, and it is not empty yet, and each plum I take from it is somehow rounder and deeper and quieter than the one before. That is not survival. That is a food that ripens in time the way we are all meant to, and so rarely manage to. Now let me be honest with you about the limits, the way my grandmother was always honest with me, because this is care, not magic. Honey will crystallize, turn cloudy and hard in the jar, and people throw it out thinking it has spoiled. It has not. Set the jar in warm water and it returns to gold. Salt will clump in humid air. It is still salt. Rice and beans keep for decades only if you truly seal them from air and moisture. And beans, even kept perfectly, grow harder to cook the older they get, so eat from your oldest first. And the fermented foods, the miso and the soy and the umeboshi, must be made properly with enough salt by someone who knows the old way, or they will fail you. There is no shortcut in this, and any man who tells you there is one is selling you something. What I am offering you is not a trick. It is the patience your great-grandmother had. Keeping them is the simplest part. The dry foods, the rice and the beans and the barley, want to be sealed against air and moisture in a container that shuts out both, kept somewhere cool and dark and out of the sun. The dried kelp and mushrooms and fish, the same, a dry cupboard and a tight lid. The honey and the salt and the sugar and the vinegar ask almost nothing of you, only a closed jar and a cool shelf. And the miso and the soy live best in the cool and the dark as well, in a crock or a bottle, opened and closed with clean hands. None of it is difficult, none of it is expensive. It asks only that you decide your home is worth provisioning, and then do a little of it each season the way it was always done. If you are still here, then this was probably meant for you. Everything I teach on this channel, including the things I have not shared yet, has been written down in one book. The link is just below this video. If you want it, it is there. Because I would rather end not on a shelf but on an idea. These foods never needed saving. They were not lost, not really. They were only set down and waiting the whole time to be picked back up. My grandmother kept a crock of miso her entire life, and drew from it and fed it, and never once in all the lean years threw good food away, and she was not preparing for the end of anything. She was simply keeping a home the way a home was meant to be kept, so that whatever the season brought, hers was a house where people ate. So let me ask you something, and I read every comment that comes to me. Tell me what your grandmother kept. The one thing that was always in her pantry, the jar or the sack or the tin that never seemed to run out. And tell me where in the world you are listening from tonight, because I would like to know whose kitchens these words are reaching. Next time, I am going to show you the strangest and most wonderful thing my grandmother ever kept. A single bed of rice bran in a wooden crock that she started once when she was young and fed and turned with her hand every single day for the rest of her life, never throwing it away, and out of it came pickles that carried our family through every winter. She kept that one thing alive for over 40 years. When I show you how simple it is to begin your own, I think you will start one this week. Until then, remember this. A full shelf is not a fear of tomorrow. It is a quiet way of saying that whatever tomorrow brings, this house will be all right.